Okay, so basically the individuals that have the most favorable traits are then going to be able to reproduce. And let me just get this felt tip pen here. Um, they're going to be able to reproduce and pass on their traits to the next generation. And this is really, I mean, they're all key, but if this, again, if this part weren't part of this of kind of this list of ingredients, there's no way that any species could benefit because the traits would be passed on. Okay, so this little kind of picture I have here is kind of nice, I think. So you start off with variation. Okay, so you have some green, green little beetles and brown little beetles, and this population is on a brown tree trunk. And so which ones are going to be more easily visible? Well, the green ones. And so you get the green ones get picked off by this bird here, and in the next kind of population or generation, you're going to get a lot more of the brown beetles than the green ones, and eventually the population is going to change so much that it might become a new species. Okay, so on to the next topic, which is interactions among organisms. So this is a general term, symbiosis, which basically means an intimate relationship between members of two or more species. So this is when basically species live together. Okay, so they live together. This is not predation, because they don't live together when there's predation. They eat each other. Okay, so this one is when they live together, and they can be either benefited, harmed, or unaffected. And often these types of relationships can result in coevolution because they are living together, and so they will kind of evolve in the same habitat and may evolve traits that coincide with each other. And the three types of symbioses are mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Okay, so those are three categories of symbiosis. Okay, so mutualism is basically when both members benefit, and an example is with mycorrhizae. And this is a type of fungus, and they have a symbiotic or a mutualistic relationship with plant roots. Okay, so the fungus actually, these are very cool. The fungus grows with the roots and provides them with a lot of nitrogen from the soil that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And the roots give the fungus food produced. That's great. Excuse me. Excuse me. Food produced by the photosynthesis in the plant. Okay, so the roots give the fungus food that it produces in its leaves. And as you can see in this picture here, that this area on the left has no mycorrhizae, and this one on the right does. And you can see how much bigger the roots are and how the plant is going to benefit from that. Okay, commensalism is when one species benefits, but the other one doesn't really care. And an example is with epiphytes and tropical trees. Okay, so epiphytes are these things here that are kind of growing on the trees themselves. And they kind of hang out on the trees, they anchor themselves there, but they don't take any nutrients from it. So the epiphyte benefits because it's closer to the sun, and that's one of the limiting factors in a tropical rainforest. You have such a large canopy, the leaves are covering everything, and so everything is fighting to get up to the sun. So that's how the epiphytes benefit, but the tree doesn't really care. Okay, parasitism, as you guys know, I'm sure, is where one species is benefited and the other is harmed. Okay, parasites rarely kill their hosts. You might want to think about why that is, and why a parasite would be upset if their host died. Okay, an example is these mites with honeybees, and this is quite a graphic picture of their breathing tubes of the bees, and these mites that basically suck the blood out from them and help weaken the bees. So that's not good. So that's an example of parasitism. Okay, so on to succession. So succession is basically the development of a community, or the change that takes place within a community over time. So you can see from this picture, you start with really small little, shoot, let's see, let me get back to my, just one second, and here is my pointer, there we go. Okay, so you can see here that you start off with really small plants, and you eventually get bigger plants, more dense plants, then you get some trees, and eventually you get a climax community. So that's the general idea, that a community will change over time this way. And so kind of more explicitly, it's it develops slowly through a series of different species. Earlier species alter the environment in some way that make it more habitable by other species. So it could change the soil. It could bring in more nutrients. It could encourage other species like birds that bring in seeds, deer that maybe break up the soil or the rocks, or kind of graze on other plants. So basically these species are not only just kind of, they look different, but they actually change the environment, which enables more different species to come in and colonize. So even providing shade. So you can imagine a barren area doesn't have shade. Once species kind of start growing in there, you're going to get more shade, and then other types of species can tolerate that type of environment. Okay, so there are two different types. There's primary and secondary. Okay, so primary succession basically begins somewhere that was never inhabited, or basically there's no soil. So it might be after a volcano erupts or a glacier retreats, and you have bare rock. Okay. And so the first step is to create this soil. So it's a big deal. It takes a lot of work for primary succession. You have to, in order to create soil, first lichen. The first step is these lichen, because they can live without soil, and they can just kind of hang out on rocks, and they secrete an acid that will crumble up the rock, and you start to begin the process of soil formation. And then you can have mosses if it's wet enough, and that's eventually going to allow grasses to come and colonize. And then you can get shrubs, and then eventually forests. And the thing with trees is that their seedlings most tree seedlings cannot stand the sun. So it takes all these shrubs to be present to provide shade for tree seedlings to grow. And that's why forests come so late in this process, because all of these plants need to be present to provide shade for the tree seedlings. Okay, so you can see this is kind of a nice picture just showing what happens. So the first, you have bare rock, okay, and then you can get some grasses and shrubs, and then finally you get a forest community, which is kind of the climax community. Okay, secondary succession is succession that begins after a place is disturbed. Okay, so this would be after a fire or a farmland that's abandoned. There is soil present. This doesn't necessarily follow primary succession. It's not like you get primary and then secondary. Secondary just means it's after a habitat has been disturbed. Okay, so it usually it occurs more rapidly than primary succession because there's soil, and soil takes a really long time to form. And here you can see a nice kind of depiction of what would happen then. So it's basically the same process, except the starting point is different. So primary succession is going to start way down here, because before this you have all the soil developed. At this point here, you have soil, and this is where secondary succession can start. You can get the weeds, you can get the grass from the beginning because there's soil. You don't need the lichen and the mosses to start it off. And that's the difference. Okay, so then you end up with a mature community in the end. And that's pretty much it. All right, thanks so much. See you in class.